Now, to get into Paul's epistle to the Galatians, we are going to start out with the situation that made him write to them. Let's start out with the background information. The years 47 through 48 AD, Paul went to Galatia and other places to place churches for the Gentiles area. After succeeding in this, he went out to Antioch. That's when some Jewish Christians came over to Galatia. It's good to know that these guys were some of the people that believed that the Mosaic law was something you needed to follow. Their thoughts were, if the Gentiles wanted to be part of God's family, they needed to obey these laws. Things like being circumcised and not to eat skin of a live animal. Once the visitors heard Paul saying that the male Gentiles didn't need to be circumcised, they were mad. They thought that the law was the finest thing to God. They then wanted all male Gentiles to be circumcised and were questioning Paul's authority. They called him an impostor of the faith. Once Paul heard this, he was outraged and decided to write them a letter. This is where his epistle to the Galatians comes in. In the Galatians, there are 3 issues pointed out. One is Paul's authority of faith. He explains his authority in chapters 1 through 2. He preaches about the gospel of the Messiah. I am amazed that you are so quickly forsaking the one who called you by grace of Christ for a different gospel. Galatians chapter 1, verse 6. He is shaken that the Galatians turn over what Paul said and that they went to follow the laws instead. He explains that he was sent by the risen Jesus to convert the Gentiles just as he did. He makes an example of what happened with Peter at Antioch. Peter was told by the same type of people that the Galatians heard from that the Gentiles are people that aren't following the rules. They aren't part of the family of God. So, he stops eating with them at the table. Paul then calls him out and says, if you, though a Jew, are living like a Gentile and not like a Jew, how can you compel the Gentiles to live like Jews? Galatians chapter 2, verse 14. Paul thinks and expresses that it is your faith that draws you closer to God, not the laws that supposedly brings you closer to Him. Now for number 2, that Mosaic loses his power. He brings up Abraham's promise with God and his offspring. He explains how Abraham's faith in God made him get noticed by God. He wants everyone to be one big family, doesn't matter your gender or social status. It is good to know this background, so it makes sense when it comes to comparing the laws and God's covenant with Abraham's offspring. He tells them that the laws were given to them long after Abraham's promise. He points out that the law was a temporary thing. There are 2 outcomes of the law with the people. The bad way is, if you didn't follow the Mosaic law, then you were looked upon as wrong. You were looked at like you weren't part of the family of God. Paul wrote, we were held in custody under the law. Galatians chapter 3, verse 23. He means they were blinded, and their faith was limited because they think that the laws are the things that make you connected to God. That is not true, though. The good way was that it kept Israel in line until the Messiah came. The law made sure they acted straight and didn't do anything too bad. The law let certain groups, Jews, benefit from the law. It should be all that should experience being closer to God and truly called a part of God's family. The final issue addressed is to live by the Spirit. He calls to them and speaks of using your faith as a connection to God. Paul says that the law is something that could be considered important, but to a limited extent. It shouldn't have the power to make Israel obey it. Through the Spirit, they will understand God's will. That is something Paul is trying to make across. Paul doesn't understand what makes you follow the law by heart, closer to God. He preaches that it is your faith that is the key to God. What matters is that we are God's creation. He loves us no matter what happens. So, don't let your faith be kept by the law. These topics are important to people's opinions about the law. We should examine the law as something that is limited. Faith is not. The cultures during this time period has some strict laws and teachings to follow. Many traditions and cultures have changed since back then, and they have either changed for the better or worse. The Book of Laws, Mosaic laws, have changed now. What changed was the rules and the ways they are done. Basically the tasks, but the truth is still there. The thing that sparked the argument was if you needed to be circumcised or not to show your faith to God. Now, it's to be baptized instead of having to circumcise. It's not forced on us now, but people think you should be baptized to show you are clean of your sins at a young age. The truth is still behind it. You're getting baptized to clean your sins so you could later be with God. Same thing with being circumcised. You're expected to do it to show your faith, but it was a deed to do. We still find ways to show your heart and faith to God, but there are many ways too. The only thing that matters is if our hearts are there. Now, let's switch to the importance of each issue. Paul's authority of faith and his Roman citizenship has gotten him everywhere. It is important to understand that his authority makes his letters and teachings more known. While the Mosaic laws is his limited power, is good to know as well. His letters gave us an insight of what we should do when it comes to showing your faith. Your faith has no limits, and God knows if you truly believe in Him and doesn't need any rules or expectations to see that. Even now, some of the Mosaic laws have expired. Lastly, our faith by Spirit. We should understand that our faith doesn't get controlled by what the law book says or what others say. Your faith is controlled by the Spirit. Have good intentions. Some facts. It is believed that the Galatians was the first letter or epistle written by Paul himself. How many times do you think the word law was used? A. 30 times, B. 8 times, and C. 34 times. It's C. 34 times. Well, that about ends it. Bye.